you're still shuffling in and out of the room, but we won't take any more of your time. This is our very first class for credit. Pierre, you're probably hearing me thank you 1,000 times today, but really for this, dealing with the Department of State is no easy task when things are normal, never mind in times of crisis. So however you were able to pull off getting our Zoom classes for credit vis-a-vis the Department of State, that is amazing, and thank you for your effort on that front. We're really excited about our class today. We're going to discuss some co-op and condo board machinations in this COVID-19 setting. One housekeeping item, we're adding everybody's camera view to this webcast, so you may see yourself as a panelist. Feel free to click your video on, to unmute yourselves. I will ask that you raise your hand before a question. Pierre, as you guys know, loves to keep these interactive. He is not a lecturer. Pierre, correct me if I'm wrong, if you want to all of a sudden be a lecturer after all these years.
Not at all, thanks.
So anyways, we're gonna give him his due respect, but if you guys wouldn't mind, you can throw your question to the chat section, raise your hand, or chime in as you see fit. Yeah, thank you so much again for dedicating your time and expertise to these matters, and really particularly getting these classes approved for credit.
Yes, thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. Well, first off, I hope everybody's still remaining healthy and safe. You know, we're trying to, at the firm, make as much productive use of the downtime as we can. And like Nick said, luckily, one of the initiatives we've been trying to do is conduct these CE classes via Zoom and to be able to issue credits. More so, you know, honestly, more importantly than the fact of issuing credits, I think it's just really, times like this, it's great for us to all come together, talk, compare, you know, contrast what we're seeing in the marketplace, and honestly remain positive. You know, for me, it's a breath of fresh air to see all you guys on Zoom. As much as I love the extra time with my little kids, adult interaction is nice. And, you know, we will get through this. You know, the world will go back to normal. We will be conducting business. God willing, in a couple of years, we'll look back at this and be like, wow, can you believe that ever happened? And, you know, getting through it, I think it's great for us to sit here together and, you know, do things like we're doing today. So I was fortunate enough, you guys know I always teach, my partner, Michael Romer, and I always teach continuing education classes. And we were fortunate enough where the Department of State is permitting us to issue credits on forums like this. So I believe we're doing 5 this month. If you're not getting the emails, email me and I'll have my assistant Sam put you on our email database. But our goal is to at least do 1 a week for as long as this shutdown and pandemic's taking place. And then hopefully in a couple of months we all see each other in person. I can tell you I will put it on the freshman 15 again after this experience. I may look a little different next time we all congregate face to face. But with that being said, this is actually my first time teaching about today's topic. And we entitled it 10 Most Common Issues We're Encountering with Co-op and Condo Boards. So we probably have, I'd say, a dozen topics approved by the state to issue credits. And we're always trying to come up with new ones. So every class, I preface it that if you guys have topics you're interested in I'm not talking about, let me know. I've been able to parse them out between 1.5 hour classes and 3.75 hour classes. So the reason I bring that up is that a topic like today's, you really can't talk about for close to 4 hours. It's great for an hour-and-a-half session. So if you guys, you know, any topics you come up with, please, I'm always looking for new ideas. And the cool thing about today, you know, give you guys a background on our firm. I know I probably know most of the people on the webinar today, but to give you a quick summary, we're a real estate boutique firm, and you guys know me personally from handling the transactional work. And our firm's actually a lot more diverse than that. 95% of our practice is real estate focused. And within that is the residential purchase sale business, the commercial purchase sale business, residential and commercial lending, real estate related litigation, and co-op and condo board rep. So we represent probably 75 co-op and condo boards. So the reason we structured the firm this way, it really gives us an area of expertise at every single seat of the closing table. And we can analyze things from both, you know, okay, how's the board going to perceive it, given our experience in representing boards? What issues can we forecast in representing buyers and sellers, having that knowledge base, things of that nature. So when we're able to congregate in person, I have a partner of mine, his name's Richard Klein. He runs our firm's general practice called Condo Board General Governance Group. And Rich was going to teach this class with me in person because I think it's valuable for you to see my perspective as a transactional lawyer and then see his perspective as a condo board attorney. And, you know, in times like this, whenever markets, there's, you know, we're in the middle of flux and change and transition, boards always start acting a little quirkier. You know, boards are trying to protect their best interests of the shareholders. They're trying to come up with new ways and new issues to spot. And so with varying degrees of success, I should say. Now, I'm going to go through the 10 most important issues that I'm seeing that we need to be aware of. And then I want to hear from you guys too, you know, what are you seeing given what's going on today and just generally issues that you've encountered. So I believe there's a feature to raise your hand on the app itself. And then I believe Nick or one of the folks from TitleVest will intervene and throw out the questions out there. That way it's just easier than everybody chatting at once. So number one, first issue, pet policies. You know, when we're conducting our due diligence, we oftentimes focus on financial aspects of the building, various rules with sublets of the building, you know, things that may not relate to topics like a pet policy. And I'm sure we've all been involved in transactions where, you know, I don't personally own any pets, so I don't have the affinity towards one that most people do. But what I've seen deals die over people not knowing exactly what pet policy is in building. I actually was representing a seller not long ago where the buyer, that no one on the buyer's representation checked to confirm what the policy was, and the buyer's dog would not qualify, and they actually walked away from the deal and lost the good chunk of their deposit. So I guess, you know, people really do love their pets to that extent they're willing to walk away from a substantial deposit. Now, what you want to confirm, especially if you're the broker on the buy side, the traits to look out for are what kind of pets are permitted. Even dogs, they have a list of different dogs that are permitted. Some are, some are not. Size is important, and number of pets. And that may sound silly, but you know, we've all had issues. You know, I represented a board years ago where they had a hoarder in the building, and the person had like 15 cats, and without a proper pet policy, you can't, you know, protect for things of that nature, because what precludes somebody from having 15 cats? It sounds silly, but it's New York City. We've seen every different type of personality out there. So from a board's perspective, it's extremely important to have a formal policy in place. From your guys' perspective, you just want to make sure you know what it is, so you're not taking your buyer to a building that they would not look at had they had this information. Now, one thing that's really come up a lot in the last couple of years are service animals, service pets, now, or emotional support pets. And this is a tricky one because, in my opinion, I feel like some buyers are manipulating this a bit in order to get pets approved in a building that may not necessarily allow pets. But if you have, you know, you guys know, boards can't discriminate. One of the protected classes is disabilities. So if I have a medical expert, that's stating that I need this emotional support animal or I need a service animal, a board cannot reject that, right? Now, how do you go about getting that? The service animals, like someone, you know, obviously someone's blind, that's a disability. The emotional support one's a little more challenging, but Fair Housing and the American Disabilities Act protect this protected class. So it's not as simple as just say getting a doctor's note. Some boards may accept that if you provide a note from your doctor, which, you know, isn't necessarily the most challenging thing to get. That'd be sufficient. Oftentimes you have to register at the United States Dog Registry, or have a licensed therapist, you know, state why you need an emotional support animal. And obviously you guys travel and jump on a plane, you see, like, you know, service animals all the time now flying with various passengers. So it's becoming more and more of a common trend. Just, it's very important to know what the building's policy is on it and get that stuff in advance. Because if a building has more of a thorough policy rather than just a simple doctor's note, you want to make sure that you can actually obtain that before you sign a contract. Because if you don't, you're going back to square one of the issue of, you know, this animal may not qualify in the building, negating the whole premise for why a buyer would want to buy in that specific building. So before moving on, has anybody had any issues on the pet policy stuff, or historically Any problems with buyers with pets moving into a building? No one ever represented crazy cat lady with 15 cats? All right, that's good news. All right, so we'll move on to the next topic. If you guys have the outline, I'm going through it in order. So I'm on page 2. And this next topic is probably one of the most difficult issues I think we've been encountering in the last 6 to 8 years in our marketplace. And it's condo boards acting more like co-op boards. So now, the reason, if you look at New York City, 70% of our buildings are co-ops. And those are all buildings that were probably built, I would say no later than the mid-90s. And obviously the reason that took place is that at the time, society, home buyers in New York City liked the ability to screen who entered their building for financial reasons and, also for maybe the social makeup of the building. Now, from 1995 to present day, with all the new development we've seen, have any of you guys seen anybody develop a co-op building? Nobody, right? If anybody has, I'd love to hear it. We've had a couple condops, and that's for various reasons. Every single new development building has been condo, because the market has dictated that people are more concerned with the ability to freely transfer or lease their units more so than they are screening who enters their building. The complete composition of our buyer, our demographic has changed in the last 30-something years. We have more investors than we ever had in the marketplace. Our city's become even more international than it was in the mid-90s. And people are more concerned with the increased value that the freely transferable component brings to property as opposed to a co-op. Now, with all that being said, co-ops, how do they operate? They have the business judgment rule. So this business judgment rule gives co-ops essentially the blanket authority to make decisions without being questioned. So the reason that is, co-ops being a corporation fall under New York business law. Now, business corporation law states that they don't want boards to be questioned by all of the shareholders for every decision they make, because that's going to impede their ability to make decisions, and it's going to slow processes down. It's going to compromise, their thought process and a number of other various things. So now, the negative to having that rule is that we've all had buyers who've been rejected in buildings, and we don't know why. And everybody wants to ask, why did you reject my buyer? Tell me, maybe I can help resolve this. Maybe there's something you're not aware of that I can provide for you, information that would make you think otherwise. And it's very, very, very difficult to ever get that answered. So the reason that co-ops have this, the negative to co-ops having this is that we are now, in representing the buyer as service providers to the consumer, we're now kind of kept in the dark, because albeit we can probably overcome a lot of the concerns, we'll never have the opportunity to know. Now condos, right? Condos have a right of first refusal, which is pretty much fairly simple. Has anybody ever seen a condo building actually exercise the right of first refusal on this chat? Nobody has, really? Wow, I had it happen twice. So I used to tell people, and I explained this to them, that the difference in co-op and condos, and I would tell buyers, condos is really more of a formality. It never happens. You don't have to worry about it. You just apply and they waive the right of first refusal. And then I had one guy where the board exercised it. I was like, oh my God, I can never say that again. Now, the two examples I had a client buying a 2-bedroom in Midtown. This is about 10 years ago. Got a great deal. It was substantially below market value. And the board happened to be sitting in a very handsome reserve fund, 7 figures easily. And the unit was less than $1 million. And the board decided that this is a great investment for the building, and they bought it for the super to live in it. And in that case, there's nothing we can do. The board exercises the right of first refusal. In the instance where a right of first refusal is actually exercised, every party except the buyer is made whole. So if I'm the board, right, and and Antonio's selling his apartment to Adam, and Adam's the buyer, and Adam and the board exercise right of first refusal, that board steps into the exact same contract that Antonio and Adam are in on. So the board can't negotiate or change one word of that contract. So board steps in, has to satisfy all the obligations. Antonio gets paid his entire purchase price, and all the brokers in the contract get paid their commission. The only one shortchanged is the buyer. and then the board takes possession of the unit and does what it wants with it. So that's how it historically works. Now, what I'm seeing is that condo boards are starting to, in my opinion, cross the line and exceed their scope of authority in screening buyers. I don't know if has anybody had any issues with condo boards with maybe excessive requests on board applications, trying to inundate you with paperwork to kill deals, anything along those lines? No one's had this, really? All right, well, I guess I have a lot of problem deals on my desk. So what I've been seeing, I'll give you a great story. About 5 years ago, I had a partner in my firm come to me, and she said, Pierre, I got referred to a condo board on the Upper East Side. The board would like to come meet with us to discuss hiring us as general counsel. I was like, great, I'd love to do it. So to give you the most cliche, stereotypical scenario I can come up with, imagine your old school Upper East Side group of, it was all, everybody on the board was exactly what you would imagine in the 1980s movie, right? And they come to my office, start asking me questions. It's rather unorthodox for 5 board members to come to your office to interview an attorney. And after 5 minutes of talking to them, they say, okay, the main thing we need your help with is to tell us how we can try to screen buyers from coming in our building and prevent people we don't want to come in. And I go, well, the issue is you're a condo, right? The makeup of your building and all your rules specifically preclude for that. That's the whole point of having a structure of a condominium. And I'm like, that you're not a co-op. You don't have that ability. And the response I got was, well, that's why we're here today. So you can tell us how we can get that. And within seconds, my reaction is, okay, we're absolutely not representing this group of people. Essentially, the moral of the story is that the boards are looking for ways to have more authority and say in terms of who comes in and out of the building, and to, unfortunately, throw wrenches into several of our deals. So the problem that we're having is that we won't know which boards do that until we get to the application process. So it's another reason why it's important for us to always, be in communication, because it's good to compare notes which boards are doing what. Not all boards are like this, but at the end of the day, it is becoming more and more of an issue in our market. The reason that boards can get away with it is that, what's your recourse, right? If I'm the board and I really don't want you to buy my building, and I inundate you with paperwork, the contract states that you have to comply with all the board's quote unquote reasonable requests and requirements, right? So I joke, if you guys have taken my CE classes, I joke all the time. The word reasonable is probably the most undefinable word in the English language, right? It is the most subjective phrase you can possibly use. So what's going to be deemed to be reasonable? If I'm asking you for tax returns for the last 10 years, I'm asking you for reference letters, I am bombarding you, I want all your bank statements, I want to confirm your personal financial statement matches with every single penny that you have, yada, 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 yada. What are you going to do is the buyer. I've had deals where boards have killed these deals, and the problem is we haven't had a party actually sue the board. So to my knowledge, I don't believe there's any case law out there which will kind of stipulate where the board goes too far and where the liability is. And I actually emailed, I'll give you a great story, when it made me reach out to the Attorney General for an opinion. A couple years back, I was representing, this is before the LLC, BVI, and trusts all became extremely commonplace in our market. So it's probably a good 6-7 years ago. I represented 2 brothers from Europe. They were buying an investment property in the city, and we were utilizing the LLC, BVI structure purely for tax purposes. For those of you guys who've taken my CEs on foreign nationals, we talk about that structure all the time, from mitigating the negative components of our tax code for foreign nationals. So it's extremely a legitimate structure. The problem is it provides for some anonymity, and it also provides for an issue of recourse in the event of a default or any issues. So we apply to the board for this, and the board comes back and says, we're not going to issue the waiver of right of first refusal unless your client puts 3 years of common charges in escrow. So obviously we're all flabbergasted, right? Like, how dare you make this request? You only have the right to buy the apartment. This is outside your scope of authority. We're not compliant. Basically take a hike. Now, that's all well and good. but they have what we need, right? They have the right of first refusal, and it needs to be waived. So in my predicament, I go straight to the condominium declaration. Condo declarations usually state that the board has, it's typically 30 business days from the date an application was submitted to either waive a right of first refusal or exercise it. And if either option is not done by that time period, it's automatically deemed to be waived, where theoretically you can actually close without having a physical waiver in hand. So that's done to hedge any risk of what I'm describing. Now, I find that provision declaration. I call my title insurance company, and I say, I call Nick at TitleVest. I'm like, Nick, I want to close. Here's my legal grounds for closing without a waiver. You should be able to issue a title insurance. I can close. In the hell with the board. I outsmarted them, and and Pierre's going to be the person that ends this issue going on in all of New York City, right? It all sounded great. So then TitleVest tells me, Pierre, that's great. When did you apply to the board? I go, 40 days ago. I'm well past the 30 business days. I applied 40 business days. They go, that's according to you. If you enter into litigation, the board is going to say, we had additional requests. These were reasonable requests on the circumstances. Thus, the clock did not start ticking. Great. So, right. So now my morale's deflated. I thought I was a genius, and I wasn't as great as I thought I was. So my next step, called Attorney General. I had a friend there at the time, and I'm like, look, I need you to issue an opinion in terms of why that this is in excess of what their authority is. Because if they're able to act in this manner, you're essentially going to create a whole issue where every board can have co-op authority, every condo board in New York City, and it'll be a disaster. And the AG goes, you're absolutely right. The problem is, without having a lawsuit in case law, there's nothing we can provide for you. Someone has to sue a board to avoid this from happening. So now I'm sitting here, I'm like, okay, I call my clients. By the way, both brothers were lawyers. And I say this every time, and I'm not meaning this in a sarcastic manner. It's true. Lawyers are the worst clients to have, right? I'm sure you guys would agree. They know everything. They're annoying. They're litigious. So these guys, I'm like, look, you can fight the good fight. We'll sue. We'll keep doing everything. I can come up with every creative argument in town. At the end of the day, it's not going to be in your interest. You're going to waste money paying me. If you want to get the apartment, let's come up with a compromise. What are you willing to live with? Forget right from wrong. Forget forget that that we find this to be an egregious request. What will be okay? So we go back to the board and we say, look, we'll provide to you 1 year's worth of common charges. And we're asking that after seeing a year of perfect payment, you release that sum back to us. The board came back and said, we'll take 1 year, but we're holding it for your entire course of ownership. So in the grand scheme of things, this was like a $2.5 million unit. Common charges, they were $25,000 a year, if that sounds right, maybe a little more. So we're not talking an insubstantial sum of money, but in comparison to the price, it wasn't that catastrophic. So we luckily got them down from 3 years to 1. They held it for the entire time of ownership, and we closed with the waiver in place. So now, backtrack, we never had this issue come up. So again, this has now become a policy in our firm where this is one of the questions we ask in our due diligence, because we need to know what they're going to come up with. And then when I started asking this question, boards told me, we take it on a case-by-case basis. That is the worst answer you can possibly give. Case-by-case means basically, let's open up for discrimination. If I'm going to require this from the two brothers in Greece, but the buyer coming from South America, I'm not requiring this of, why did I require it in one instance but not the other? So then we advise all our boards, you have to have a uniform policy in place that you apply across the board. Otherwise, you're exposing yourself to discrimination up and down, left and right. So where am I going with this? In surveying these buildings, don't take for granted that condominiums, the process is that much simpler. And now it's on us to figure out which boards are making additional requests, which boards have maybe unorthodox rules and requirements, whether they're written or unwritten. It's adding more homework on our desks. And at the end of the day, I don't think you're going to have this trend change anytime soon until we have a lawsuit in place. So with that, anybody have any questions, concerns, any transactions that what I discussed maybe touched upon?
I actually do. So I had hi, it's Rob Gross, everybody.
Hey Rob, what's up?
Hey, so I had a client that was, the board exercised right of first refusal. It was like a $2.5 million deal. And it ended up that the board would grant purchase if the soon-to-be owner would give 10% of the purchase amount, basically in ransom money, never to be returned. So they did exercise their right, but is that practice legal?
Wait, the board said we're going to exercise our right to buy the apartment unless
Correct.
you give us 10% to the building?
No. Well, actually, they said we are exercising our right. And then the buyer said, what do I need to do?
Okay.
And they told the buyer what he needed to do. And it was 10% of the purchase price, basically as a gift or a capital contribution.
Wow. No, that's completely illegal. That's completely illegal.
Okay, I may email you after this meeting. Get your
Yeah.
opinion.
Wait, did you close?
Yes,
How long ago?
it's quite some time ago.
Well, here's the issue. Does your client want to go sue the board now that they live in the building? That's always the problem of suing
yeah.
post-closing. Like you should have sued pre-closing.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your opinion.
Rob, Charlotte's asking which building was this, if you don't mind sharing the address.
I prefer not to say.
Understood. But you should tell your client. I mean, look, I'd have to see what the statute of limitations is on something like this and how many years it's been. People who live in buildings do sue their buildings. Obviously, it creates bad will and could create awkwardness. It just depends on the specific buyer if it's something they care about. Some buyers may not care and say, I don't mind taking an elevator with the guy I'm suing. Others may feel differently. So it's definitely worth the conversation, Rob, if your client wants to talk about it.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Anybody else have any questions on this topic before I move on to the next one?
Hey, Pierre, it's Adam. Quick question. So you mentioned that the condo board asking for money in escrow. What is the latest on that? Because I know I heard chatter about it being considered security deposit and it wasn't allowed anymore. What is the latest going on with that?
So condo boards can do it. So what you're referring to is the recent changes in rent regulation that took place last June. That's precluding a lot of co-op boards from requesting a maintenance escrow because the relationship is a lessor-lessee relationship through a proprietary lease. Mm-hmm. So that falls, in a lot of our opinion, and not every attorney and board is abiding by this, but most of us are of the mindset that those regs impact co-op condo boards because of that. And boards should not ask for maintenance escrows until that issue has been resolved by the state. Now, flip it to condos. Condos are real property. So there's no lessor-lessee relationship. So the rent reg changes that you're referring to do not impact a condo board's ability to request a common charge escrow.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, anytime. Cool. Well, if everybody's good on this, let me move
Pierre.
on.
Pierre, it's Charlotte Van Doren. Hi, how you doing?
How you doing?
I did get advice through the managing agent for an Upper East Side co-op that rather than asking the tenant to be in this co-op to put monies in escrow, that they would allow the seller to prepay at the closing table or put in escrow at the closing table the maintenance. There could be
the buyer would pay the seller back monthly over time.
No, I mean, our buyer would pay the seller at the closing table to present a check to the co-op board for the escrowed maintenance.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So essentially it's a roundabout where the seller would give the board, here's a year's worth of maintenance paid up front. So the board's not holding it in escrow per se. And then the buyer is reimbursing the seller at closing. So it doesn't look like the lessor is asking the lessee for more than 1 month's rent and 1 month's security at closing.
Correct.
Okay. It's interesting. It's creative. I always say whenever you're trying to come up with a creative solution to skirt, new laws and rules. You just have to be careful. Like, we don't know. Like, if the state came and said and scrutinized that deal, I don't know what their reaction would be. I definitely think it's a creative one. I always tell clients, it's our job to advise and to break down the risks of every scenario and ways of mitigating those risks, and it's their decision to make. In that scenario, we would advise the client that there is a risk if the state gets wind of this. However, we can't speak to the degree of a risk, but it is a solution that does seem somewhat viable. So, and I'm sure that that's how your client was counseled, and it makes sense.
Great. That's helpful. Thank you.
Cool. Anytime. So now another huge. Sorry, did someone else have a question?
Pierre, hi, it's Kathy Taub.
Hey, Kathy, what's up?
Well, I just wanted to say that I have a client that is in contract now in a condo. We were only allowed to look, per his instruction, to search condos that did not require disclosure of tax returns because he's a very private individual, which was interesting because, as you noted, there's so many condos now that have very rigorous requirements in their board packages. So we narrowed it down to just a small number of buildings or sponsor units, since obviously buying from a sponsor in a new dev, you don't have any of these requirements at all. So what we did in the contract, because the board package, while it did not require tax returns, there was language that said, in addition to the foregoing, the board has the right to ask for any reasonable additional documentation. So in the contract, we defined reasonable.
Okay.
And we defined that it would not be reasonable for the board to ask for tax returns, and and if they insisted, that would give the buyer a right to rescind. Yep.
That's a great solution. Whenever you're concerned with what the requirements of a board may be, and you have a buyer of the description that you have, we always outline in the rider what will be permitted between the parties and what will not. So that's 100% the best way to go about it, because if your buyer is going into a deal saying, I cannot provide, X, Y, and Z under any circumstance, we have to have that carved out where the parties all acknowledge that in the contract. So that way, if it does come up, the buyer can walk away and they're not held in default. So that's an incredible solution for that. And it's a lot of buyers, look, the whole issue with the LLCs and the BVIs and all these structures is that it creates a high level of anonymity. Anonymity is not always bad. A lot of people, I always joke, I go, our system with Acris, it's incredibly intrusive that we can all look up where we live and find out who paid for what and who lives where. There's no level of privacy with our system. And a lot of people have legitimate reasons for wanting anonymity. I've had clients that were high government officials in foreign countries, and they're like, it won't look good for me if I'm taking $5 million out of my country to buy an apartment in Manhattan. I don't want people being able to know. Every high profile client is worried about being in Brick Underground or Page 6 or God knows what, stating that they bought this unit. So I do get it. As long as the reason is an above board reason, I think it's something that's perfectly fine to try to facilitate for clients. So my next one I want to go to, if you go to page 3, co-op boards dictating pricing of apartments. This is becoming a huge problem for us, and one that's going to come up more given the fact that we're in another transition in the market. Now, co-op boards, what we're encountering is that they won't provide much insight before we go into contract. Most sellers don't have access to their board. They can't ask them, what price are you looking for, so on and so forth. And what we're seeing is that we'll apply to the board, and the board will come back and say, we'll approve the buyer if you increase the price by X%. Has anybody had this come up?
Yes.
Who's that? Sorry.
Charlotte Van Doren.
Hey, Charlotte. So do you mind telling me about it a little bit, and I'll share my couple stories?
Yeah, there's a building that will only approve co-op that will only approve at a certain number, regardless of the condition of the apartment. And so what happens, the attorneys create side letter. That you can only really do this with a cash deal, because you can only adjust have any
Right.
kind of credit at closing no more than 6% if you're working with a bank.
That's right. Federal guidelines
Right.
cap it.
Correct. So avoid fraudulent, any kind of a bank fraud situation. The advice is that there be a side letter for a construction credit at closing to equal the difference between the number stipulated by the board and the true value perceived between the parties of the co-op property. How are you? Tell me your experience with this, Pierre.
So your scenario is easier because you had this knowledge before going into contract. The toughest part is not having this knowledge, and this comes up at the time of applying to the board, and the contract doesn't contemplate for this scenario, which it won't unless we know, right? Like, we're not going to throw a wrench into a deal, and unless we know the board's going to request to say buyer agrees to do X, Y, and Z. It really boils down to the parties want to do the deal and come up with a solution.
So Pierre, I have to say, in addition, all of the parties operate on the purchase price that is that price that is acceptable to the board. The mansion tax, the transfer taxes, the brokerage fee, everything is based on that higher number. And then there's a side letter between the parties.
Correct. So my two scenarios I had a year ago, a client buying in a co-op for, I believe is about 2.1, and she was buying it in cash. So I'll give you two scenarios. One where I was representing the buyer in a cash deal, and one where I was representing a seller where there was financing. So to give you both sides. The cash deal is simple. So board comes to us and says, we'll approve your client as long as you up the price $100,000. So our first reactions were clearly we're not going to pay $100,000 more. So we amend the contract to have a purchase price of 2.2, and then we have in the rider that we get $100,000 or side letter, we get $100,000 credit at closing. However, the transfer taxes and everything else is paid on the higher number. The seller covered the delta between the two in order to keep us in the deal and not cancel the contract. So net came out to the same to the buyer.
Correct.
How we cover that. So we, I'll be honest with you, and this is a great conversation for us to have. I wasn't fully comfortable with it, ethically speaking. On one hand, I have to represent the best interest of my client. I want to get them to close. Unless it's something that's illegal, we're going to make sure that they can close the transaction. However, what boards are doing, they're defrauding the marketplace from a valuation perspective. It's horrible, to be honest with you. You're creating fabricated pricing on recorded documents that are available to the public, which then makes the public not have a real sense of what values are. And boards are doing this to try to inflate pricing to keep a certain threshold. So on one hand, I hate when they do this because of that reason. On the other hand, let's talk about it from the board's perspective. The board has the right to act in, quote unquote, the best interest of the building. Part of a board's duty is preserving the value of the shares in the corporation. So it's very hard to fight with the board legally that what they're doing is illegal, because they're going to say we're preserving the shares in the best interest of everybody in the building, and your pricing of our shares is not accurate. The problem with that is, let's be honest, what do boards know about pricing? It's a joke in a lot of ways. It just, it's very hard from a legal perspective to come up with an argument to negate this. I'm hoping actually at some point the AG, these price concessions are coming up, especially in sponsors. Sponsors are the first ones to introduce this concept to the market, right? Sponsors will give you every concession under the sun that's not recordable. I did a deal for $20 million a year and a half ago at one of the most high-end exclusive buildings in New York City. I can't give you the address, but for a $20 million deal, we had a $500,000 quote-unquote decoration credit. And we're talking one of the nicest buildings in New York City. What did you do to redecorate for $500,000? The property's probably perfect, right? It's just a way of the developer being able to keep that recorded price at $20 million and the buyer's net being where they want it to be. And that $500,000 credit is not a recordable number. So, I'm hoping at some point the AG figures out a way to issue some ruling or some parameters for for this. It's just hard because a lot of this is done via side letters. A lot of this is done, you know, in ways that parties can't track. I don't like the practice of it, but it is reality in what we're doing right now. So
yeah, well, you know, the other issue is that when they go to sell, their basis is going to be the recorded number, which, you know, does bring up the question of tax fraud.
absolutely, absolutely, it does, because they get audited. The government ever says, "Let me see the funds you brought to closing," and there's a shortfall of 6 figures. That's not good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a huge problem. I'm telling you, I really hate the practice of it, but it's reality. We just have to figure out how to navigate it, because there's no rules around this. Like, where does the concession become egregious? At what point are we crossing the line? You know, $100,000 on a $2.1 million deal. Okay, that's not that crazy. It's, you know, what is that, 2%, whatever the number may be. So it's not a horrific sum, but what's to preclude someone from saying 25%, right? Like, where do you draw the line?
Pierre?
Yeah.
It's Mercedes. I had 2 situations like that. And I represented the buyers and 2 condominiums. One, 2 years ago, it was a sponsor unit. They gave us, should I say the building? No, I can't. It was a 7,
No.
they were asking $10 million. We got the deal negotiated in the 7s. And they needed an extra unit to make the condo, the condo, the offering plan in effect. And the broker representing the sponsor came to me. I know you guys want it, and we can go into contract. We will give you $1 million. We will pay 50. The transfer taxes, obviously, they reduce it from our commission, but we will give you $1.5 million decorating.
Yeah.
Credit.
Right.
The deal closed at 7.3 something. You know, they paid part of the thing. That number never appeared, and that was 2017. We closed in 2018. The building closed. It's a condo in the Upper East Side. It's a conversion. We got it. I mean, and then another condo on Fifth Avenue. This is many years ago. I can say this because it's a long time ago. 838 Fifth Avenue. I represented the buyer. They gave us $2.5 million decorating. It was they sold the units, CFO, just with a little kitchen, something, a white box. So they gave us 2.5. It closed at one number, 13 something million dollars, I remember, and they gave us $2.5 million decorating fee. Well, my buyer renovated the apartment. He married somebody that didn't want to live in New York, and we put the apartment on the market. So we put the apartment on the market at the price that he bought it for before. So the person that purchased the unit thought he got a very good deal because he bought it at the same number, but they didn't know. And I was representing the seller. So I was, you know, and the seller is a lawyer. That I could not disclose the information of that discounted, this decorating $2.5 million decorating credit.
Right.
And originally we closed at 13 million something. And then I sold it for 13,250,000 3 years later.
Okay.
So the buyer that bought it, I represented the seller, had no way to find out. And I failed at the time. I represented the seller. It was a good deal because it was already renovated, blah, blah, blah. But they didn't know that shenanigan when happened. The same thing with the building on the east side, the condo conversion, that we did get that fee. Everybody else that bought in the building afterwards, the same line, the numbers are much higher, but we really got $1 million. Besides of all the other concessions, renovate, decorate. Oh, and we got there was a fee for they had to pay extra, I think like $100-something thousand for contribution to the purchase of the supers apartment. They waived that fee. They waive a lot of fees. And they gave us a decorating. So we closed at a 7.3 something, but we really didn't. So, and it was a sponsor recently, not last year, but 2018.
Right, right. Well, your scenario with the white box, that's has at least some legitimacy to it.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so you're better off. That's a much better scenario than most.
Right.
But you know
Right.
what we're talking though is that, yeah, I mean the numbers that you're throwing out there are huge sums. I mean,
Huge sums. Right. Well,
huge,
the
yeah.
part. Right. But the one on the east side that I sold 2018, and is, you know, it's a conversion, and it was a pre-war co-op condo, and my buyer really wanted it, and my buyer is also an attorney, and I represent the buyer, and I tried to get as much as I could. So remembering that thing about the decorating fee, and I said, what else could we do? What else could you give me? I didn't present the actual why let's do the decorating fee. What else besides of all these things that you throwing on the table, besides of the discount and stuff like that? Give me something else. And
Right.
they came up themselves with the decorating fee. It was $1 million decorating, and the apartment was completely done, completely finished, and we closed. And I think my buyer got an amazing deal.
Yeah, yeah.
But nobody else in the building did, which is, you know.
I know that's the
right.
that's the whole quandary of the situation is that
No.
you got a great deal for your buyer. You represented
Right.
your buyer. However, unfortunately, you know, it facilitates false valuations for everybody else.
Exactly right. Exactly.
That's why
right, which is terrible.
I was in the same boat. You know, I'm telling you, I don't have an answer for the solution. I'm just hoping, you know, and your percentages are astronomical in terms of
Right.
the
But
fluctuations.
there were high prices. You know, when it was 13 something million dollars, the other one they were asking, you know, ridiculous amount. They said it at 12. We end up at 7 something, but we really didn't sell at 7 something, because if you add up the, you know, they threw the money for the fees for the super's apartment, the fees for the two. The only thing that they did take that we said we cannot take it is the two that there were I think 2 months of common charges for the finance, whatever. So that's the only thing that they paid all the transfer taxes, the mansion tax. They paid the mansion tax, and they didn't take the percentage out of our commission. So they took all that plus the fee. So that didn't show anywhere.
No, I mean, this is why I'm hoping the AG at some point gets wind of this and issues guidelines for it. You know, because it's
Right.
not. I just don't know how they police it, because there's so many ways of doing it where no one will know. But
Right.
I'm hoping they figure it out, because I don't think it's at a certain point it becomes unethical. You know.
Well, I think so. I mean, I represented one buyers in both cases, and seller in the second case, because he wanted to sell that apartment. And the buyer that bought the apartment, it was a very lovely broker, and I could not say, gee, this is not the number, because the number register was the number register. So, but they didn't know what a good deal I negotiated for my buyer.
Well, let me tell you about my other one. I had one recently, just a couple months ago. My client was selling a unit for, it wasn't a high price. It was, I think, in the low 500,000 range, and he was selling it to a buyer obtaining financing. The board came back and said, we don't agree with the price. We want the price to be 10% higher. Now, the board was completely off base. Like I even looked at the comps, you know, units in the building this unit needed a gut renovation. My client had bought it for his sister who had disabilities and unfortunately passed away. Was carrying an empty apartment, and other units traded for less in much better condition on higher floors with better views. So really, like, the comps were completely in our favor in justifying pricing. If anything, the pricing seemed to be a decent price under the circumstance. And the board came back and said, unless you increase it 10%, we're going to reject the buyer. Now, we try to, you know, argue with the board. We ended up engaging. So in our co-op condo practice group, we have about 4 attorneys in that group. One's a gentleman, Rich Klein, who runs general governance. And then I have another partner whose name's Emil Saman, who's a litigator. And his litigation practice is real estate focused with a niche of co-op condo issues. So we actually engaged him to start dialogue with the board and threatening to sue, because here my client is carrying a vacant unit that he owned in his own name for the benefit of his, you know, sister with disabilities that passed away. and the board's arbitrarily requiring 10% increase in pricing, how are you going to get to that number?
Right.
The buyers obtaining finance, Charlotte just discussed how federal guidelines cap concessions of 6% in contracts, because then when you talk about banks, you're talking about their appraisals. So if you're creating this whole nonsense of inflated pricing, now you're committing mortgage fraud. It's the other problem we have to worry about, because now you're completely skewing what the real valuations are for banks conducting appraisals. So in this scenario, we ended up getting the board to come down a certain amount. Our client threw in a couple bucks to make it go away, and we got the credit to be below the federal guideline threshold in order to get the deal done, and we closed. But this required both parties adamantly wanting to do the deal. You know, the buyer could have been like, I don't want to move in a building with this nonsense. This is a nightmare. Like, I'll take my rejection and walk away. I'm not coming out of pocket an extra penny. So we were lucky in the sense that the stars aligned. This took, I want to say we fought with them for 4 to 6 months. I mean, it wasn't easy. Our client spent money on legal fees that they shouldn't have had to spend. It really is unfortunate, but I think we discussed some really good examples of this. And I think, you know, as a group, obviously, look, your group, one of the big focal points is ethical practices in our industry. And I think this is something that, you know, we should be talking about, and talking about, you know, how to address it. Again, I'll say it again. I'm hoping, you know, we get some guidance from the AG at some point. Now, let me jump to another problem, or not a problem necessarily, but it's a good topic. So every now and then we discussed how co-op boards have the business judgment rule for rejecting buyers. Have you guys ever been involved in reversing a co-op board rejection? Nobody has?
Yes.
Yeah, who said yes? Sorry.
Mercedes. Again, I've been doing this for too long, so I had all the stories. You know,
Tell me.
And I can tell you the building, and this is a pure discrimination. It was a pure discrimination thing. If it would have happened now, and my buyer really wanted, it's 1045 Park Avenue. I had a buyer that's still my friend, still in the building. Now she's in the board, a female surgeon. Okay, her husband, credentials up to the gazoo, financials, perfect financials, et cetera, et cetera. She was buying the apartment with her husband. Okay, the money, her husband worked for the World Bank, had a Harvard MBA, had a PhD from the London School of Economics, but made, I think at that time, $80,000. She was making in the $900,000. We're talking about 2020, okay? 2000, I'm sorry, no, 2000, 20 years ago. The apartment needed work. We went, you know, we have the package stuff, that. I get a call from one of the board members, not from the managing agent. And they said to us, well, we will reject this package, but one condition that we get approve the package is if the husband of the doctor, if the doctor gets a life insurance of $1 million and put it in the name of the house, not term, full life insurance of $1 million, and put it in the name of the husband, and that the board has the copy, and the insurance had to be valid for the next 5 years. So it was a conundrum, because my buyer, they wanted the apartment. She was pregnant. They were I sold the previous apartment that they had. So they had to get an apartment. They had to move into the apartment. I had Sally Stevens, Burke and Burke. I have Greg Saber was our attorney. And Greg said, you know something, this is completely illegal. This is discrimination. This is awful. And she said, I am going to do it. I'm going to do that. I'm going to get the insurance. I am going to do it. I present it to the board. And then we had the board interview at the board meeting, at the closing. They had to present the insurance, the copy of the insurance. They had to sign an affidavit that they will maintain that insurance for 5 years. I mean, and the husband had to she had to get medical tests to be able to get $1 million insurance. She was pregnant. She's a surgeon. It was a nightmare from hell, and we did it. because she
Yeah.
wanted the apartment. She wanted the apartment.
Yeah, you gotta, as much, every now and then boards will communicate with you in terms of what the reason for rejection is. And oftentimes, we've had a number of times where we represented a celebrity or a musician or an artist. There's confusion in terms of what they actually do. Like, I had a client once that was a musician, and he didn't play any instruments in the unit. He wrote music. He was the one who wrote the music. And the board rejected him because they were worried about noise concerns. And then we explained to the board, no, he's not actually bringing drums and a guitar into the apartment. He writes. And the board approved him. We got lucky in that we were able to find out why. Boards oftentimes won't tell you why because they don't want to expose themselves to, discrimination. So that's always a good thing. Oftentimes it's financial concerns. Maybe, we'll ask the board, why would you reject? I had one not long ago where the buyer had significant assets but had a very low income because it was all retirement income. And the board had concerns, and we can loop in a guarantor in that situation. Like, she had a son that made substantial income. We were able to get a guarantor to guarantee the maintenance obligations. So we've been successful. I want to say it's not often. I mean, it's no more than once a year we are able to reverse a turn down. Maybe even less. I'd say once every few years. But we don't give up when it happens. We try to find out why and come up with a solution to alleviate the board's concerns. But again, like to your example, Mercedes, you have to have parties that really want to do the deal.
Exactly right. That was pure discrimination because I said to the member of the board, because they call me, and Greg Saber was on the line with me. I was in his office. I said, they call you, you talk, and they know that I'm here. And I said, if the case, I said, I never seen anything like this. This is pure discrimination. My buyer would proceed with your request. However, let me ask you a question. If the case was reversed, if the husband had I said, I had many, many, many transactions that the husband is the breadwinner. The husband makes a ton of money. The wife is a stay-home wife, and I never had a problem. And you know what the guy said to me? I mean, this is really, and you can call Greg Saber and ask him. He said, well, the men don't get pregnant. And if the doctor gets pregnant and she wants to stay home, where is the money coming from? I said, you have assets in the excess of $30 million. What is the worry here? I said, this is a case of discrimination. And Greg said, you can say it's a case of discrimination. I said, it's a case of discrimination. And they said, no, it's not. So we proceeded, we closed, she stayed in the building, and the person in the board that was the neighbor next door, she bought the apartment next door, years later combined it, and is no longer in the building, but it was 1045 Park Avenue. And it was one of the most disgusting situations that I've ever been in the business. Horrible.
Well, I'm going to go later into outline in terms of what the elements for discrimination are and how to address it. We'll definitely touch upon that. A couple others I want to go through that are important, and I love the dialogue. This has been really insightful on all these topics. How many of you guys as brokers also sit on your board sit on the board as well? Anybody on their board? Antonio, you are. Anybody else? So an issue I encounter are conflicts of interest with being a broker in the building and also being on the board. Now, Antonio, if you don't mind me throwing it to you, as a board member, if you're a broker on the deal that the board is surveying, it's a co-op or a condo?
I've been on co-ops and I've been on condos before.
Okay.
Doing this, by the way, Pierre. And co-op currently.
Okay. Do you recuse yourself from decision-making on deals that you're the broker on?
Absolutely. There's another broker on the board, and we both are very respectful, and we always recuse ourselves. Particularly also, even if we're not part of the deal, ethically, if we even know the person, because we are in real estate and there could be a competing buyer that we know who want the deal, we are very, very ethical. The other broker is a Sotheby's broker, and we are very respectful, and we want to keep practicing that in terms, and also tell all our brokers to always do the right thing.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
even have the iota of anyone thinking there's any monkey business going on or any kind of bias. So I often recuse myself.
Yeah, one thing I'd recommend is that, look, if you're a broker, obviously you being on the board is in your interest because you're helping make decisions that impact, you know, the health of your building, values of the building, you know, you're creating value for that building, which helps your job as a broker. The negative, so I get why brokers would want to be on the board. The problem is it also creates a conflict of interest in that I've seen situations where I had one years ago where my client was buying a co-op unit, and the listing agent was the vice president of the board. And we read the board minutes, we asked the managing agent questions. There was discussion of a building being erected right in front of my client's apartment where a public school was situated, and the board kept that discussion out of the minutes. And my client moved in, and 3 months later in the newspaper, it's an article about the board fighting with the school in order of selling those air rights that would build a building that would basically kill my client's views. And the broker / board member had knowledge of this, and it wasn't contained anywhere. My client did not end up suing, but that is a great example of how somebody can be completely exposed. You just have to be very, very careful. Just be aware of the conflicts of interest. And honestly, you know, Antonio said it best, recuse yourself even if you have some casual connection to the buyer. You know, don't ever put yourself in that position. Just step away from your, you know, role as a board member and let the remaining quote unquote unbiased board members make the decision on that applicant. Best way to protect yourself.
And there's also, from the consumer point of view, I had a buyer at the condo in the Upper East Side, Mason East, and there's a broker who does a lot of, I won't mention her name. I like her. She's actually a friend, but there is a perception that if you don't list with her, that it probably won't sell, or the deal will be sabotaged because she's part of the board. But I think we as brokers, as an industry, we need to take that seriously, that we shouldn't have that perception that, you know, we are, especially in New York, we need to be above the line all the time. And I think I have done many deals in any building I've lived in. I've been very active. I also am very passionate about helping the building and helping the community. So it's not just to get deals, but I have gotten many deals by being part of the board, and also I've volunteered at other boards that I'm not part of. I just want to contribute to the community. But I come from an authentic point of view, meaning I care about the board, and I care about the building and care about the community. And from that, I get deals. But many times also I've turned down deals because I said I'm just too close. Meaning, I think they should give it to a listing, you know, to another broker, the listing, because you know, I'm too close. I think the big message I'm saying here is, you know, we as NYRAC, I think that's our big mission, is to always do the right thing. Anyway, I just want to.
Yeah, I completely agree. Did somebody else jumping in for a comment there? No. Okay, cool. So let's move on. Next one.
Actually, Pierre, can you hear me? It's Sean Turner.
Hey, Sean.
So my husband is president of our board. It's self-managed co-op in Tribeca. It at times, yes, it could be a conflict of interest. I've sold in the building, but I have to say that I was able to get a deal and bring both parties together who each wanted something, because my husband was able to be the mediator with the board and with a very difficult seller to get something accomplished that everybody wanted at the end of the day. And I was very aware of it at the time, and I communicated with my husband all the time, like what his role had to be and how careful we had to be in his communications. He didn't vote at the end of the day, but he definitely, you know, this involved valuating a piece of the common element off of the elevator so the new buyers could absorb that into their unit, and going back into the history of the building many, many years to evaluate the value of that and how it was to be treated in the transaction. It involved a flip tax, that the rules having been changed since before this owner had the apartment. It was very, very complicated. But in that instance, it actually helped. And he did not vote at the end of the day. I mean, it was a unanimous vote anyway. But so you can actually help your building. It was a good thing for the building that this deal got done.
Right, right. You know, look, I get what you're saying. It just, you're walking a fine line. So you just got to be extraordinarily careful. Your husband recusing himself in the final vote obviously was smart. You just have to be very careful in that any analysis or influence is not a self-serving one. So it presents the opportunity for a conflict of interest where if, you know, look, if anything was done wrong or anything goes wrong post-closing, all of a sudden there's a claim that's easily able to be made. So you just got to be very, very careful in that scenario. But I get what you're saying. You know, I see the benefit to that. It just, you're walking a fine line. So another one, and I won't spend much time on this, is smoking bans. This was a very popular topic in the co-op condo board world years back, where boards were wanting to implement smoking bans, obviously for health reasons. And the question was, did the board have the authority to do so? Did it require shareholder vote? And a lot of buildings now have smoking bans in effect. So it's kind of like the pet policy concept, where you just want to make sure if you do have a client who's a smoker, make sure you know what the building's policy on that is. Obviously, someone who's a big smoker is not going to want to move into a building or probably not, I should say, that they can't smoke in. Now, one topic I want to spend a good amount of time on, which is very important to what we do daily. When we have buyers that want to buy in an LLC or a trust, let's forget condos for a second, co-op boards. How do we get co-op boards to approve an LLC or a trust? You know, this came up, I don't know if you guys recall, back in at least New Year's of 2012, we had the fiscal cliff negotiations, where one of the things that was highlighted was the estate tax. And a lot of our real estate clients are utilizing buying in the name of a trust purely for estate tax, estate planning reasons, which are completely viable and legitimate. Now, years ago, boards looked at any purchaser besides an individual was a red flag. And as time has gone by, a lot of board members are now taking advantage of structures such as a trust for estate planning purposes. And a lot of boards are knowledgeable in it, and a lot of boards are not. Now, the question that we have, how do we get boards to approve these entities? Now, have any of you guys had a buyer buy in a co-op utilizing a trust or an LLC?
Yes.
Now, did the board have a clear policy in place, or was the policy a bit non-existent and you were confronted with how to get them to approve it? Anybody want to take that one or no?
Pierre, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
It's Sean. Yes, actually, the first time I ever had this happen was probably 15 to 20 years ago in a co-op in Tribeca. The buyers wanted to buy in a trust, and nobody was really doing that at the time. And Oz Hanley was the attorney for the co-op, and it took a very long time to get the deal done. But it did end up happening. And since then, I've seen this happen more often. I've also had it happen where it was a sponsor sale for a co-op, and we would not make it contingent on them purchasing in their trust, but their attorney actually was able to get the trust approved despite the fact that it wasn't contingent on it, kind of through a side door with the attorney for the co-op.
Right. So here's the thing. As brokers, if you're negotiating a deal where you know the buyer, a lot of buyers have to buy in trust. They will not acquire an asset unless it's in the name of a trust. I want to go through what's the board's legitimate concerns with this, and how do we address those concerns? So the issue is you have two types of trust. You have irrevocable and revocable. Revocable is, Sean, I give you, $3 million in a trust today, and tomorrow I decide I don't like you that much, and I revoke it, I take it all back. And I have that authority, and there's nothing you can do. So what this means is that if I apply to a board and I buy a name of a revocable trust, I can change the ownership behind the board's back the next day. So first question is the trust irrevocable, revocable? A board is more inclined to approve an irrevocable trust because it mitigates the issue that I just described. Now, second question, if I'm buying in a trust, who's going to live there, right? Who are the occupants? I buy in a trust, who's to say I can have anybody under the sun come live there, theoretically. We sign an occupancy affidavit where basically, let's just say, for instance, my wife and I are the trustees of the trust, and we're doing this trust for estate planning purposes for the benefit of our children. Now, we sign the occupancy affidavit individually, where we fall under the same parameters as the proprietary lease provides for in terms of permitted occupants. So it's me, my wife, and our quote unquote immediate family. I provide that. There's no risk to the board that I'm not going to have random people associated with the trust or anybody come occupy the unit. So again, first thing is irrevocable trust is stronger. Second thing, occupancy affidavit. Third, if there's an issue in the building, a noise complaint, maintenance defaults, things of that nature, it's harder to pursue legal action against an entity, any form of entity, than it is an individual. So we provide a personal guarantee from the trustees. In this scenario, it'd be my wife and I, where if there ever was a default, they not only can they sue the trust, they can sue us personally for the default of maintenance or any issues in the building. So again, just like if we were buying a co-op in our individual name, that's implicit in the structure of all the ownership documents. And lastly, and this we can't do right now until the state clarifies it with the rent regs, but is providing a maintenance escrow. That's really the biggest issue, is that if you don't pay your maintenance, who can the board come after personally? The board wants to go after an individual. So that you can't do at the moment, but historically that we've offered. So whenever you're brokering a deal, if something I want to buy in a trust, first thing is, let's confirm the building's policy in a trust. What are their requirements? And B, let's get ahead of it and offer these things to mitigate a risk of a turn down. Because I had a board member, we represented a high-end board in Chelsea, and years ago, the president called me up. He goes, Pierre, we have a great shareholder in this building. He's been here for like 15 years. We love the guy, stand-up guy. They want to transfer their co-op from their individual name to trust. I don't know, we don't want to prove it because we don't know much about it. And that's really why a lot of these are rejected. It's just the board doesn't want to deal with it. They don't know. It's a whole new topic. So I said, okay, let's go through it. What are your main concerns? And then I created this policy for them. And they were like, well, what's the risk what's the risk to us if all of this is in place? And in that scenario, I was like, there really isn't any, could there be something I'm not thinking of? Slight chance, but to be honest with you, again, if it's irrevocable, all the parties involved. It's extraordinarily difficult to untangle irrevocable trust. If it's an occupancy agreement or an occupancy affidavit, I call it occupancy agreement. Who the permitted occupants are. If you have a personal guarantee, a guarantor to go after personally, if you want to circumvent the trust, you have that. And historically, you have money in escrow for maintenance. What real risk is there to you? And they were like, that's great, you're right. And I'm like, you should permit this because if anything, you're opening up the potential candidates for your building to a broader audience. And they went for it. So, that's how I always address trust. I think it's really important, though, for those of you guys don't, in brokering these deals, I even recommend putting the stuff in the deal sheet. It is agreed upon business term right off the bat, where this is discussed and outlined, and there's no ambiguity in terms of what the requirements will be. Now, I want to jump to a really important topic, condo boards. Now, the elements of discrimination. We describe this a lot, where if you guys go to page 6 of my outline, I have the 11 elements that are protected classes under New York City human rights law. Now, I'm going to go through each one. Race/national origin, sexual orientation, religion, disability, gender, marital status, alienage, citizenship status, age, lawful occupation, or because children may be residents. Now, if a board rejects a buyer for any of those reasons, that's discrimination where you can pursue legal action against the board. That's all well and good, but how do you prove, right? Like, that's the biggest issue. Like, I had once a seller of a co-op of a property near the United Nations where they had 3 different buyers, 2 board rejections. And the broker called me up and said, Pierre, we have a feeling, I believe that the building is a bit of bigots in a sense where the 2 buyers they rejected were same-sex couples. And it's a trend and it's happened before in the building. And, you know, we view this to be discrimination. We want to pursue recourse. And obviously the initial reaction is if this is in fact true, it's a horrific thing. The problem is what's giving you that inclination. You know, a pattern alone is very difficult to establish the quote unquote burden of proof. The party making the claim has a burden of proof to demonstrate and prove that that actually was for discriminatory purposes. And how do you do that unless there's a verbal statement made or a written statement made? That's the issue, is that, you know, you can't pursue that legal recourse based off of a hunch or simply a pattern. So it was really unfortunate for us because our client ended up having to go to contract with 3 different buyers to finally sell a unit and carry the property for over a year longer than she wanted to. So our seller, I apologize, our seller had to do all that. And our seller obviously suffered a tremendous financial detriment because of this. If you have any inclination for discriminatory rejection, you know, the only way, again, if there's a verbal statement made in an interview or the board puts something in writing, where I have seen this, where a board puts something in writing asking a question that would violate one of the protected classes I just listed, and off the bat right there, you know, that's an easy one to prove. But has anybody ever pursued action against a board based on discrimination or tried to overturn a board and turn them all because of discrimination? Nobody has? It's very hard to do. Another important thing about discrimination is that it also relates to you guys from a fair housing perspective. So in screening, you know, if I had a question come up a while ago where someone said, Pierre, I know the board won't allow a certain demographic in the building. I know it. I've worked in the building. You know, I feel like if I accept an offer from a buyer and we apply to the board, it's a waste of time. That person's going to get rejected. I know this, right? And the issue for you guys as agents is that the board can act in a discriminatory manner. Your client, the seller, can act in a discriminatory manner. You can't, and you can't be the messenger of that discrimination. Even the fact that it's not your judgment call to make, you're the messenger. And I say this in fair housing, especially with rentals, it's very common. You just be very careful what you're conveying from a message perspective, where you have to provide the seller with all the offers received, and it's the seller's decision to make. If the seller has knowledge and says, I know the board's not going to approve this guy because they don't like this ethnicity, fine. Seller can make the decision. You can't, and you can't relay that message. So that's an important thing I wanted to harp on. We have about 7 minutes left, and I have 2 main points I want to discuss before throwing out for a couple questions and a couple things I want to run by you guys. So let me just get through that real quick. This one's rather relevant now. Timing on co-op and condo board applications. So here we are, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and everybody's asking me, Pierre, the contract has a deadline at this date to submit a board application. The contract has a closing date of this date, and the outside date with a 30-day right of adjournment is this date. Do we have any rights for default, any recourse, any rights to cancel? Right now, in the pandemic we're living through, essentially all deadlines and dates are thrown out the window. Courts are even closed. You can't even go to court to go try to sue somebody. You have to work with every party involved in extending dates to accommodate the circumstance that we're under. So what I'm talking about with co-op boards, and the timing of this is good too, because the boilerplate contract states that if a co-op board does not issue a decision on an applicant within 30 business days of the closing date in the contract, either party can cancel. So if my closing date is on or about April 1st, 2020, the board has 30 business days from April 1st, 2020 to render decision. Let's just say that date's May 10th. By May 10th, if they don't render decision, either party can cancel the deal. Now, the reason that I bring this to your attention is that In the summer months, many of our boards are out east in the Hamptons. Many of our boards are on vacation. We have many applications sitting there for 60 days where you're still waiting to get a decision. We always edit this date in the contract, depending on the season, to hedge against this risk. So in summer months, it's really important to make sure that that date is not 30 days. It has to be at least 45 business days, because you want to have the ability where a party can't cancel because a board member's on vacation and the interview didn't happen. Now, let's talk about interviews. How are you guys dealing with interviews during the whole coronavirus? Has anybody had any candidates interviewed via Zoom like we're doing now? For those of you guys who haven't, if you are, for everybody who's still trying to conduct business, boards are becoming amenable to interviewing people via FaceTime and Zoom. So I wouldn't look at it. I'm getting some messages now for a couple of people saying yes. I'm really glad. That's 3 people saying yes. That's great. I wouldn't look at it like, okay, we're going to be sitting here idle until this is over. Still submit the package. Still schedule interviews. Boards will do what we're doing right now. This is becoming, more and more commonplace anyway with technology, but people still want to conduct business. I mean, we're still closing deals virtually. We're still getting board approvals. Obviously, the volumes declined substantially, but it's still happening. So let me go now to the last section of the outline, and I'm having the section titled 5 Most Popular Reasons for a Co-op Board Rejection. So if you go through all this, a lot of this is going to be somewhat basic to you guys, but a lot of it is something we shouldn't take for granted. And I'm gonna depict some of this with actual real life examples. So 1, failure to provide accurate financial information. You guys accept an offer. You get the revenue financial statement where everybody writes down their financial scenario, and then you accept the offer based off that. We go to the application process, and that's where you actually have to prove you're worth what you claim you're worth. I had a client years ago signed the financial statement with a net worth over $100 million, and is an extremely affluent family from London. And we get to the application time, and the buyer was buying like a $2.5 million co-op for their daughter. It's somewhere in Chelsea for their daughter who's going to NYU and to have a place to come when they come visit. And the buyer submitted financials to the board demonstrating a net worth of about 10 million. And they go, we don't want to show the board more than that. We're private people. It's like, all of a sudden you're private people. The problem is you signed a financial statement in making an offer for some 10 times more than that. And the client goes, well, Pierre, I'm basically showing 4 times worth more than the apartment I'm buying in cash. What's the issue? Like, this shouldn't be an issue. And my reaction is that if you get rejected by the board because of this, and you're also a buyer coming from abroad, the sellers can have an extremely good argument to state that you applied in bad faith, and they have rights to your deposit. So this client was a rather unique one. He goes, okay, I'm going to get you a letter from my accountant that I'm worth over 100 million, and I use the same accountant as the Queen of England. So that should satisfy the board. And I'm like, that's nice. It sounds pretty, but it's not gonna cut it. Luckily, we were able to convince the client at some point to increase the accuracy of the financial information they submitted, and they got approved by the board. So you just want to make sure, someone mentioned earlier the privacy component and not want to show tax returns. That's Kathy, I think it was you. And you want to, again, just highlight to that point of making sure we explain to our clients what's really required out of a co-op, and that they can comply with those requirements. And if they can't, we're carving out in our contract what they will not have to comply with, so we don't risk a default. Second, occupation. We discussed this briefly about musicians, therapists. Oftentimes we'll see a therapist rejected by a board because the board doesn't want to run the risk of patients coming in and out of the building. So you want to make sure you properly elaborate to the board what the profession is of the candidate, and demonstrate to the board that their profession won't cause any nuisances in the building. Basic one, parents buying for children. Obviously, you guys know some buildings permit this, others don't. Let me keep going through my list. Preparing buyers for board interviews. I had a client once that bought in a building and had regrets buying in that building. So he decided to show up to the board interview drunk. He got tanked right before the interview, popped in and tanked the interview as best as he possibly could. He got approved by the board. It was a call for the West Village. I guess they thought it was cool that he was hammered at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, weekday. But you want to make sure that clients realize, what's required of them in a board interview. Oftentimes, if clients have buyer's remorse and want to get out of a deal, and I'm dealing with this now. I have a client that the seller won't give them a break on the purchase price, given what's going on today. And they said, okay, we'll go in for the interview and we'll tell the board that we just lost a lot of money in the market and we shouldn't be financially qualified anymore and get out of the deal. That's called bad faith, and easily risk losing your deposit. So you just want to make sure, buyers are properly prepped for these interviews. And, these reasons I'm stating, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. They're just, from my experience, it's good to, talk it out a little bit. So with that being said, we hit 11:30 right on the dot. Before I open up to questions, so what we're doing with this is that I'm doing these 1.5-hour classes. So if those of you guys are ever interested, my assistant Sam is going to email you from a link called Samantha@NYRACenter.com. The New York Real Estate Center is a school that we created to issue credits. For those of you guys know, our school is one of your guys' sponsors. All the power hours I attend are accredited, and we're doing a lot of these things with the organization and also for the real estate community as a whole. One thing, these Zoom classes, we're starting to tape them. So Michael and I are working on creating an LMS, which is a learning management system, where our website is going to offer these classes online for people to start taking them online. And we're going to create like a monthly subscription agreement a monthly subscription setup where you have access to everything online and continuing to do all the classes we do live as a complement to the industry. We're going to ask for those you guys, because we have to have people's consent to have these images online. So when we send the certificates, we'll send an agreement that you just state that you authorize us to post this on our website. If anybody has any issues with this, please let me know. But we're hoping to create a great video catalog of all our classes moving forward. So with all that being said, did anybody have any questions on the presentation today, today's topic, or anything in general you want to talk about before we conclude? Yeah, Antonio.
Hi, so I'm in the middle of a deal and they already got the commitment letter. We're closing in 30 days. And the bank, because the guy's assets have gone down and got laid off, the bank rescinded the commitment letter. And the buyer is now, I'm the listing broker. The buyer's broker told me that they want to back out of the deal. If they've been approved before, and is it possible for this buyer to back out of the deal and get their contract deposit back?
I have the exact same deal on my desk right now, and my buyer's using it. My buyer's manipulating it to try to get out of the deal. You're walking a very fine line. The mortgage, like in our last breakfast session we talked about the coronavirus funding contingency, right? We didn't have this in a lot of our contracts, which are at the board interview stage right now. This only come about for deals in the last couple of weeks. So if the buyer got the commitment letter issued, they satisfy the mortgage contingency. If they go to the board and they say, you know what, our financial predicament's changed. Now the bank's rescinded our commitment letter. We can't do the deal. They risk applying to the board in bad faith. So you have to be very careful about that, where you have to look at the contract, see if there's any funding contingency component for what happens if a bank withdraws the commitment letter. The best thing you can do is try to extend the deadline for the bank to get the buyer to get a new commitment letter and send them to a bank that will do the deal and see if they'll qualify that way.
And they're board approved, by the way.
They're board approved, yeah. I had another one where they wanted to go back to the board and tell them, hey, I lost, $250,000 in the stock market because of this month. You should rescind my approval. I'm like, you can't do that. You can't go back. All this skirts the fine line of, are you applying in bad faith or trying to, persuade the board's decision one way or another? So you just want to be very careful with that.
And we know that they have the money, they have the cash, they're putting 50% down. The bank just doesn't want to give them money, and it's a private bank. So I know that they can get funding from a big bank. So we're the lawyers. It's the lawyers' game now, but I want to give an alley up to the lawyer and say maybe he should talk to you.
I don't know if he'll like that suggestion, but I'm all for it. Cool. Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, Pierre, how do you handle a situation if you have right before closing a renegotiation of a price in a co-op deal, and the price is negotiated down, obviously not up?
Right.
Do you need to get co-op board approval again of that, because co-ops can reject based on price?
I believe it's my opinion you'd have to notify the board of it.
And then how would that work timing wise?
Well, timing wise is all out of the window at the moment, unfortunately. It's a really good question, because if all of a sudden you had approval a month ago and for some reason you didn't close, right? Whatever the case may be. And this whole pandemic took place and the buyer says, I'm going to, default on the deal and not proceed. Seller gives whatever concession they may be to keep the buyer in the deal. You have to notify the board of that, because it's impacting the value of the shares and something that they need to be able to issue an opinion on. So in terms of timing, how does that impact timing? There's no clear-cut answer to that. It's really just going to be a matter of how long does the board take to respond? At what point can the parties cancel the deal? And, how can we all work together to keep the deal intact? Right now, I can't emphasize enough, any time frames that are put in writing are more or less meaningless. It's really a matter of the parties working together, and if we end up having any egregious delays, then we can look to see what options we have from a legal perspective. But at the moment, it's really a matter of everybody working together and extending deadlines and trying to get things done. Cool. Anybody have any other questions? Great. Well, if you guys do, obviously, everybody knows where to reach me. So please, working, I'm around. Let me know anything you need. It's great to hear from everybody. We'll be doing this regularly, so you'll be getting emails. I love doing this stuff. So thank you guys. Nick, thanks for coordinating this, setting everything up. I thought it was a great session. So really appreciate it, guys. And Nick, do you have anything to say before we part ways?
No, just want to thank everyone for their participation. What a wonderful session. For everyone that asked questions, both publicly and privately, thank you for your participation. Pierre, thank you as always for lending your expertise, and we look forward to another session soon.
Cool. Guys, look out for the certificates. They'll be emailed to you shortly, and we'll all be in touch soon.